Well, you stole one of my notes. You've seen one hospital, you've seen one hospital, right? And so it's such a great point, and it's a challenge with software development, frankly, as a whole. I saw this in my past life before I really got into healthcare, and of course now it's amplified pretty significantly. I mean, to be perfectly honest, it's a balance, right? So when something comes in, we think about, okay, does this function provide value to just this customer, or based on other things we've heard, other feedback we've gotten, does this seem like this is more of a systemic problem that we're trying to solve?
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go Beyond Clean.
On this episode of Beyond Clean, we're going to be speaking with Lexie Hagel, VP of Ops at Surgio, and we're going to be talking about tracking systems and how exactly do you get one of these off the ground, what's important, and then once you get it going, where can you take it and how do you direct the development, Hank?
Yeah, Justin, these are not easy systems or programs from what I'm told to develop, but we're going to find out on this interview what it looks like from the inside. You know, users, we know how to point and click, but it's the developers, the engineers, the innovators out there that got to put all these things together to solve the problems out there in our department that we're trying to solve. So I'm pumped to talk to Lexie today about that and get a little insight, hopefully spark a conversation around the industry on these kinds of topics that are facing us as more and more of these softwares and solutions come into the market.
All right, we're going to be right back with Lexie. Stay with us. I'm Justin Poulin.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From 17 Studios, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Lexie Hagel, Vice President of Ops at Surgio, joining us now. And we're going to be getting a behind-the-scenes look at how tracking systems are made. We finally are getting some adoption of tracking systems at a higher percentage across the country. The value really unprecedented, but how do you even get these out to market? And what are some of the challenges and some of the design considerations in the background? We're going to be talking about that today with you, Lexie. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Lexie, why don't you give us your background? Tell us about what you do at Surgio and how you found the company and your interest in software.
Sure. So I've been with Surgio Health for about 3 years. And when I came onto the team, I was really hired to work really closely with our developers and our product team. So my background is in technology. I've been working in technology in some capacity for the last 10, 12 years or so. And what I've mostly been focusing on is leading project teams for software development. So really what this means is collaborating closely with the end users, so our clients, customers, and then the development team to help realize the vision of a solution, help find a software platform that can address the problems that customers are having. And now I've brought that to Surgio Health and been able to work really closely with hospitals, SPD staff, manufacturers, and sort of everyone in between to deliver a best-in-class product.
Well, you said solve some of those problems that are going on. Why don't you give us some background on that? What are the problems that tracking systems try to solve today for especially sterile processing? I realize there's implications even in some cases for the vendor community and the operating room, but just targeting, the sterile processing audience specifically.
Yeah, I'd say at a high level, instrument tracking systems try to create efficiencies in an SPD. And this can manifest itself in a variety of ways. One of the big ways that this can happen, Justin, as you mentioned, is creating and fostering better communication between the SPD and the OR. It's also finding efficiencies in workflow. If you're leveraging your tracking system properly, you're able to highlight some of those inefficiencies that your SPD might be experiencing, and you can leverage the information and the tools in the tracking system to make your department more efficient, more optimized, so you can run, the most effectively to really deliver the best patient outcomes and the best operational workflows for your facility. I'd say one more item that instrument tracking systems can be super helpful for is optimizing inventory. We know that one of the biggest challenges that facilities have, especially in an SPD, is storage space. And it seems so simple, right? But that storage space is really valuable. So if we can help a facility identify what sets are actually being utilized, what's being turned, how often it's being turned, you can use that information to maybe offload some sets or combine and create sets that you're short on. And so you're really maximizing the space that you have, which we know is, pretty limited in a lot of SPDs across the country.
That's a great reminder of a session that Jeff Wertz did with us at a previous conference around sterile storage and the implications of data to that. And I mean, there's so many implications, right? We'll probably get into some more of those a year later, but every aspect of our life in sterile processing is either currently touched by data and tracking, or it soon will be touched once the developers get through with it. But before we get into too many more of those, I want to kind of start us at the beginning. And this is really the heart around this interview and kind of what prompted this idea for the developer side is many of us, we're used to the user side of the tracking systems that we're talking about today. Like, we do understand the implications, we understand the workflow, but unless we have been developers ourselves, in another life, before sterile processing, it's really hard, especially for people like me, to understand what is actually going on in the background. Like, I see my side of the equation, but what's that other side? What's the vendor facing side of these softwares and tools? So start us kind of at the beginning and just say, when something like this comes to life, a surgical instrument tracking software or system, how does it go from the idea all the way now to the implementation it's in the industry being used?
How long do we have?
2 minutes.
Okay. All right. So, the most important part of any software development process, whether you're building an instrument tracking system or your favorite, iPhone app, is to understand from the end users, the people who are going to be actually engaging with the tool that you're providing, what problems is your solution trying to solve? So, when I think about, okay, we're creating a new application in its entirety, or even a module or a feature, the approach is the same, right? What's the problem? Based on the people that we know are going to be using it, because as developers, as product owners, we think we know, but the reality is we don't really have any idea. And so it's incumbent upon the people that are creating the thing to work really closely with the people who are going to be using that thing. So what we did, we went into the field, we worked with some facilities, tried to identify what some of their biggest problems were. The best way to do that is to be honest, to look at some facilities who've had a handful of Joint Commission citations. Maybe they're running into some other challenges. What are those challenges? What are the symptoms? And then how can we suss out the best way to facilitate a tool and a solution that's going to improve the workflows and improve the lives of everyone that's using it? So we take all this field research, a bunch of people sit down in a room, and then we start building what we called our wireframes. We build these gray box visuals that's essentially like a dumb version of what a software solution would look like. Click this button, you go to that page. Once we have all of that figured out, then we get to sit down with the developers, and the developers say, okay, well, if I click this button, then what's supposed to happen? So we get down to the super, super granular level, down to button color. What does the button say? All those really specific details that I think as end users, we tend to take for granted a little bit, right? I click this button, it does this thing. There's so much that goes into it. And as non-developers, it's our responsibility to communicate to the technical team, that brain power behind the actual creation of the software, why it's important that this button completes assembly, and then what happens when that button is clicked, right? What's the next step, and why does that next step matter? So once you figure all that stuff out, you write it down. You have all these like individual tickets, right? These little blurbs of information that give you all the details that someone's going to need to build it. Then the engineers get to work. They do, they have the hard job, right? They're the ones that are really creating this thing. Then we have to test it like there's no tomorrow, because we want to make sure that anytime we deploy something into the field, right? Feature, brand new application, whatever, we don't want it to be buggy. We want it to work seamlessly so that the users have the best experience. And that's the long and short of how software is made. It takes a long time, and it takes a lot of different people collaborating together so that you really have the best end product possible.
Yeah, I know you crammed a lot in that quick definition. So maybe we'll flesh some of that out. Yeah. Well, even at the beginning, like you kind of mentioned, hey, the first part of this is, hey, let's talk to the people who are using this system, are going to use a system like this. And it really brought kind of flashbacks to the conversations that we have in the space all the time around IFUs, the way that many of those IFUs are written by people like the developers and engineers, who may have never stepped foot in a sterile processing department before. And so if they're not getting that insight direct from the clinician and the user, they're going to be designing an IFU that's going to be unreadable and unexecutable. And they're going to be designing a tracking software that's not going to be very helpful at the end of the day. So I would imagine that step is one of the most important steps in the whole process that you mentioned.
I would say it's the most important, both on the front end and also on the back end. So the initial gathering of information, and then also the testing of the tool before it's sort of live in the wild, right? So getting it in the hands of the people who are actually going to be using it as a testing ground, so they can say, hey, this is really, clunky. This doesn't really fit in with our workflow. If we're moving through decon this way, it'd be really helpful to have this certain feature at a different point in the process. And so one of the things that we find as being incredibly valuable is to have that sort of testing ground, if you will, so that you can really ensure the things that you're creating are of the utmost value to the people that are using them.
There's a cliche in the industry, and I'm sure it's not just about sterile processing, but the phrase goes, if you've seen one sterile processing department, you've seen one sterile processing department. And I would imagine that has some challenges when you're trying to design a program that can fit the needs of a multitude of different types of customers in different settings, ambulatory, level 1 trauma, multiple departments in one facility, scattered out. You got substeriles, etc. How do you go about this whole process that you mentioned without building a million customized programs, and instead just build one that can potentially meet the needs of all of us?
Sure. Well, you stole one of my notes. You've seen one hospital, right? And so it's such a great point, and it's a challenge with software development, frankly, as a whole. I saw this in my past life before I really got into healthcare, and of course now it's amplified pretty significantly. I mean, to be perfectly honest, it's a balance, right? So when something comes in, we think about, okay, does this function, provide value to just this customer, or based on other things we've heard, other feedback we've gotten, does this seem like this is more of a systemic problem that we're trying to solve? I think to that end as well, you really have to identify if you're solving a symptom or you're addressing a larger problem, because for many facilities, the symptoms might be different, but the problem might be the same. And so the best approach for software is to really think critically about what your customers, what your users are bringing to you, what challenges are they having, and then trying to work backwards. And the best way to do that is to really evaluate what different people are telling you. So to sort of get that market research to some extent, get multiple participants from different kinds of facilities, because what we find so often is that even if you're dealing with an ASC and a level 1 trauma center, maybe that's a bad example, a level 2, right? It's possible that the problems they're having are the same. They don't have enough storage space. They are turning trays really quickly, and they have bad data. They have bad information. So they're not working off of the best, recipe, count sheets, whatever you want to call them, and that might be causing a problem in assembly. And so if you work backwards that way, so often you can find what's really happening and then address the problem there, instead of, creating all these micro solutions that solve the symptoms for one facility and not the symptoms for another facility. So it's really a balance, and it's being thoughtful and intentional in the information that your users are bringing to you, and taking, understanding the value that they're bringing. We rely heavily on feedback from our users. It's the core, frankly, of, I think a business. And so listening to them, hearing them, and then working through those problems, I think is how you ultimately create a solution that's the most applicable to the most people.
And so what you're saying is if I complain enough and I'll get what I want for the tracking system. I'm just kidding. But on a more...
Well, but sometimes I think,
I don't think you're joking completely, Hank. I think, honestly, maybe not complaining, but speak up may be a more proactive way to say that, because when you're trying to launch a company, especially when, like Lexie's talking about, literally from ground up, you need that feedback, because you need to know and be connected to what's the most important things, because you can't do everything all at once and have them work interconnectedly, right, Lexie?
100%. And so while I never want to encourage people calling and complaining a ton, what I love to hear is when users say, hey, this thing isn't working for me. Can we figure out how to make it work better? And the people that are, really invested in that process and want to create the most efficient SPD possible are really, really valuable to our business. And from a development perspective as well, developers like a lot of information. So the more information we get from customers, it makes our developers really happy, because they don't, they're not experiencing SPD's challenges on a daily basis. We need to make it real for them. And by doing that, it allows them to help find the best solutions that can be most applicable to the most amount of people.
I'm really surprised Justin hasn't piped up a little bit more, because he comes from an IT background as well, to service the hospital space. So, yeah, that question like Justin called out, it was said in jest, but what I was getting at is kind of what you answered there, Lexie, is what's that most productive means to voice the need, but then also to voice the priority of what that request is to us at the same time. And, one of the things I wanted to flesh out of this interview was also helping users understand there may be a lot of other things at play that, your request, to your point, like it may be you're requesting to solve the symptom and not the true cause of whatever that frustration is or what the need is. And that design request could not necessarily be an easy fix. It could be months. It could be a year worth of redevelopment. So it's not as easy as just, hey, I would prefer it to be, blue instead of red when I click this button.
Right. And I addressed this, a while ago when we were talking about what it takes to build a software platform, but particularly when software has already been developed and it's already out in the field, everything you add or everything you change has significant downstream effects. So I use the example of completing assembly. Okay, when I complete assembly, there's a handful of things that probably does, right? It tracks the data for productivity. It tells me that a label is ready to be printed. It tells me that a count sheet is ready to be printed. And it tracks all that information against that instance of the tray, plus myself, plus a timestamp. There's all these different things that happen with the click of just one button. So every time we think about changes, whether they be large or small, you're always starting from, okay, we understand obviously what either the customer or we want to accomplish, but then what are all the other pieces of the system that it touches? Because a good instrument tracking system is gathering information and data from all these different components and all these different workflows to generate, valuable analysis and valuable information for the facility. So, you're sort of looking at, okay, if I change this button, what are all the things that happen when I click it? And then based on those things, what does that mean, right? So, when we think about priority of functionality or features that need to happen, there's always the consideration of, number one, if it's preventing you from being able to do your job, that's a priority. If it's causing significant amounts more work and, it's messing with some other workflows, that's a priority. If it's more of a feature, we would like to call feature enhancement, right? Those are all those considerations that we take into play, because then we usually uncover something else. Oh, here's another great way to solve for the thing that you need. And that goes back to identifying the problem instead of just addressing the symptom.
So you kind of alluded to this in that answer, but I want to go back to what you said about the data and gathering, because on the user side of it, like we're familiar with, hey, like I can see how many loads have been processed today. I can see the number of instruments processed. What kind of data do you see on the back end of these technologies that maybe the user does not see, but is still valuable information and continue to improve the software over time?
All of it. Well, I think, a successful system captures everything, right? Any action that happens is captured and it's leveraged in some capacity in a variety of different ways. So there's a handful of data aggregates that your analysis can yield really high value results. And then there's the tracking of, let's just take movement history of a tray as like a really simple example, right? A tray moves from point A to point B. It goes through decon, goes into a washer, it gets assembled, it gets sterilized, it goes to storage, maybe it goes to a case cart, and then it goes to the OR. Okay. So we're tracking all of those steps in that process. We're also tracking who did them. We're also tracking when they did them. We're also tracking what instruments are on that count sheet. We're also tracking, based on assembly, are all the instruments that are in that count sheet supposed to be there? Oh, also, when you scanned it to the case cart, did you attach a case? Okay, now it's linked to that case. So there's this whole loop of information that we're constantly aggregating. And then based off of that, there's all these other levels of analysis that you can do with that data, because the data is what has power, right? And has a significant amount of value. Let's take inventory optimization. We talked about sterile storage and the value of that space. How many times is a tray turned? Have you turned it in the last year? If not, get rid of it. Guess what? You just found an opportunity to save money by offloading a tray and, creating space for valuable assets that you might need that your facility is short on. Trays linked to cases and decon. This is one for us that's really important, right? Are you linking your trays to the patient? What if something happens and you need to trace back all that information? Have you made that connection? We gather that data so as leadership, you can help analyze, how's my facility doing? Are they linking trays to cases in decontamination so that I have that valuable information should I ever need it? We hope that no one does. But if they do, now it makes that, follow-up process so much easier.
So one of the things I know, as Hank alluded to, I've got a little background and experience in IS, and it's anytime you try to bring in a solution these days, the contracting process is really elongated because there are IT questionnaires and security assessments, and I've literally seen them be 500 pages, and you pretty much have to answer every nuanced question as you go through it. And a lot of it has to do with data privacy and, concerns that healthcare organizations will essentially be hijacked, right? All at the same time, we're trying to get more transparent and work together and share information. And so there's a real tension there. And these two things are very much at odds with each other in some respects, not all. I mean, obviously there's a need for privacy, but how do you balance that? How do you make sure that the data is accessible and it's valuable and it can really contribute to the operations end to end and not in a silo, and at the same time maintain the privacy of the information? And, I'll go to the heart of it too. If you're tracking anything to the patient, it's a whole different line you're crossing there.
Yeah. And I will say this is a challenge, not just in healthcare. Based on my background, this is something that I've dealt with for the last decade in a variety of different ways for a variety of different industries. Obviously, it's a little bit amplified in healthcare because of patient information. As far as we are concerned, we do not interact with any PHI. So that is not something that is attached to our system at all. That is a huge wall that we intend to keep up for the reasons that you just explained, Justin. As far as data transparency and the value that provides, so one of the things about modern technology today is if it is cloud-based, meaning there's not a server in the basement of the hospital that has to run the system, then you open up a lot more opportunities that you can also control. Let's take an IDN structure, for example. If you have an IDN that's on a cloud platform and they have a handful of their facilities that are participating in that same solution, based on how the data might be structured, you can actually get visibility from the IDN level to all of your facilities. But because of how the data is encrypted and siloed into that account, you remain your own little entity outside of any other IDN or hospital that shouldn't see that information. So the flexibility that cloud solutions provide and the level of encryption that's available now, through data security protocols that exist in, 2023 is really the ideal combination of data security and transparency where you want transparency. And really it's up to the facility and the IDN and the GPO, whomever sort of that, top level party is, to say, this is how I want my data to be utilized, to be shared amongst my own. And that's really the beauty of technology is you can, to this extent, right, you can sort of choose your own adventure in the way that makes the most sense for you, because what you want to be able to see is, let's again use that IDN example, you want to be able to compare data across facilities, identify those facilities that are successful, the ones that are struggling, and then use the lessons from the ones that are successful to help support those maybe facilities that might be struggling a little bit more and give them that valuable information and data and guide to improve so that you have a really successful system as a whole.
Yeah, and that's rare. That's rare to happen.
It's hard
at the system level.
Yes,
yeah,
for sure. But it's there and it's available. And I think it's something that's relatively new to healthcare. So for all the, hospital listeners out there, just know that it's available and it can work. And we've dealt with a ton of security questionnaires and never had a problem with it. If it's done well and it's done correctly, the only option is not a server in your basement, because that's going by the wayside,
Yeah, and that goes into another topic we're not going to have time to cover today, but the whole benchmarking conversation, because we're often looking outside of ourselves, want to benchmark, but if you have this data across those IDNs and you can benchmark to yourself, how much better is that, But again, we'll save that maybe for round 2.
Great. Can't
so
wait
let me
for
follow
that.
up. Yeah. So, one of your other takeaways too that I want to make sure and call out is if you're listening today and you don't have a relationship with your hospital IT, start now. The time you don't want to get to know those folks is when there's a problem or, when you have a new system you're trying to onboard and implement. Then it's like a lack of trust, a lack of comfort. Like you want to build those relationships when you can, so that down the road, when you need them, it's already there and all these things go a lot smoother. So that's just an important takeaway. But
that's a great point.
So let me ask you, on the design and functionality of these programs, what role do industry standards and regulations play? Like, are you familiarizing yourself with what the AAMI guidelines or the AORN guidelines are expecting us to do on the practical sense, and then kind of weaving that into the design? What's that kind of process look like?
Sure. So yes, but if you've seen one hospital, you've seen one hospital. We do, scope management is a great example, right? AAMI has guidelines for endoscope reprocessing. They are just that. They are guidelines. And so one of the challenges that instrument tracking systems face is we to date haven't seen any really defined standards that are required to be followed at every facility the exact same way, right? I'm seeing nods. I don't know. Obviously, our guests can't hear that, but it is a challenge in the industry overall. So I think what a good solution does is it uses that information from those bodies that are trusted and are valued in the industry to create that foundation, and then allow for enough flexibility to match what a hospital really needs to get their work accomplished. Hank, when we first started, you mentioned the IFU example. IFUs sometimes exclude or include processes that don't match something that can be feasible at a hospital, right? They're either don't have the right equipment, so they have to find an alternative or something of that nature. And so if we, as technology solutions, have a strong foundation informed by the bodies that create standards and guidelines with enough fluidity to allow hospitals to get their work done in the manner by which they need to do it, unless you have another suggestion, that's sort of the best we can do, right? In short of having a body that says this is how it has to be done, it has to be done the same way everywhere, there's no room for flexibility. We as solutions have to find sort of that in between that still encourages the best work from the users while also, matching the reality of what goes on in SPDs.
All right. So as we kind of wrap up, great discussion. And as Hank said, there's some other points in there that we'd love to talk about related to benchmarking. But I think I'm going to go a little bit different as we wrap up. And I want to talk about technologies. And so obviously a tracking system is a technology, but there are lots of, I would say, add-ons or open source concepts, some already implemented. What kinds of technologies do you envision being bolted on to tracking systems to really enhance their effectiveness, their usability? And, think about it. The access to technology in decon is limited by the fact of the PPE that we wear, but there are applications, for technology in that environment. I just think it has to be accessed in a different way than a keyboard and a scanner. And so, talk to me about that kind of vision for the future.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to any, HSPA, was the other week. If you go to AORN, any of these big conferences, I was at the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons earlier this year, and there are so many technologies that are on the market, coming to market, and it's a really exciting time to be in healthcare. Listen, historically, we know healthcare is a little bit behind other industries, so we have some catching up to do, but there's so much opportunity on the forefront. I would say the fastest to deploy, RFID, right? RFID has been around forever. We all know that. We've seen applications of it. In SPD, there are so many amazing applications for RFID, and it's a technology that's accessible today. We have a bolt-on for RFID for our platform, and it's such a value. It can be such a valuable tool and solution. That's the crawl. It's already here, right? Then we start thinking about machine vision, AI, because that's where the world is going. It's where healthcare is going. It's where SPDs will go. Having some sort of augmented headset, Justin, to your point, in decon to really help staff understand how to properly process and clean certain complex pieces of instrumentation. That's really the future. I will say, in the hospital setting, one of the challenges that machine vision has is learning all the instrumentation. Right? It seems like such a logical step, and it's really where we're going. But for this computer brain, right, to learn all the instruments that are at a hospital today, that's going to be the biggest hurdle to implementing any solution moving forward. Complex instruments, multi-piece instruments, you got to take it apart. The machine vision has to understand each of those different components, how they go together, different angles that instrument might be open. So there's a lot of complexities there, but there are some really cool companies out there that are already starting to do these types of things with, particularly with your common sets, some of your general instrument trays, maybe some of your total knee sets. I will say this is also an opportunity for manufacturers to get really involved in this process, right? They hold the keys to the kingdom when it comes to the instrumentation. So I think without question, machine vision is the frontier, and the way that can be expedited is really through active engagement with the system as a whole, manufacturers, SPDs, ORs, really wanting to be a part of that process, instrument tracking system solutions, right? It has to be collaborative in order for it to be deployed successfully at, the various healthcare locations, right? SPD, OR, that whole healthcare value supply chain. So I'm rambling a little bit because it's still new and there's so much opportunity, but it's complicated and it's complex, and there's a lot of learning that needs to happen in the industry in order for, I think, it to be successfully deployed anywhere, to be honest.
Yeah, one of the exciting opportunities that you alluded to there that I think is going to have the biggest impact regardless of the technology, the application of it continuing to enhance the way that we bridge the gap between provider and supplier informationally. We talked about that privacy and that data transparency, but one thing that you will find tracking systems depending, and this goes more broadly than what people sometimes think of just in terms of instrument tracking, but the way that we pull that information and share it between the two so that both the supplier and the provider on site are in lockstep with that value supply chain, or even just literally the loaner trays that are coming in, et cetera. I just think having that common ground understanding, and I've even done some interviews where, tracking systems help to qualify savings. And there's some best practices out there where the health system and the supplier are saying, okay, let's work together. Let's use this technology to measure it. If we can save 10%, we each get 5%. And that's the kind of transformational change that's got to happen in healthcare. And I think that's where this really, can drive us forward is we have to be talking the same language on the data side. And that's not it. We have two different sets of data, two different sets of KPIs, and we really haven't gotten that middleman to make that interchange something that's beneficial for both parties.
I think you're spot on, Justin. I mean, that through line between manufacturer and hospital there's still a pretty big chasm. It really is a purchasing relationship. And that feels like it's where it ends. And there's so much opportunity for both sides of that value chain to gain really, really helpful, pertinent, and important information if there's a little bit of that data shared. Nothing necessarily proprietary, right? Because if you think about it, the vendors are delivering the instruments, hopefully with some IFUs as well. So that data transfer is already happening. Can we make it a little cleaner? Can we make it a little bit more formal in such a way that both sides are getting the maximum benefit from the information that's coming from the other? And I think there's lots of ways to do that, and we can talk about that on another podcast. And I'm sure there's lots of other people that feel the same way, but that is such a huge opportunity. And then that can only be expanded upon as technology continues to advance and evolve and innovate, because that's not changing. Things are only moving faster. So can the participants in this ecosystem keep up and collaborate to such a degree that really ultimately gives our customers, because at the end of the day, we have the same customers in a lot of ways. Can they get the most value from everything that all of us are providing in that echo chamber of solutions?
Lexie, great job. Great job today. Really
Thanks.
appreciate your insights.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, and hopefully I'll get to talk to y'all again soon.
Speaking with Lexie Hagel, VP of Ops at Surgio Health, talking about tracking systems. I really like the point we're making at the very end. Not just about bringing on the technologies and bolting them onto these existing structures to sort of enhance their wide-ranging applicability and the efficiency of engaging with the technology, but really more about what it's going to take to solve this financial crisis in healthcare. It's going to take skin in the game from both parties. And I think a lot of times when we talk about tracking systems, we don't really think about big picture vision like that. We're thinking about the mundane, day-to-day, scan this instrument, scan it to the set. And that is important. That is an important foundation. The benchmarking piece is one step up the ladder, as we talked last season about sort of, compensation and evaluating our talent and crediting them based on their production. But I honestly believe this is the bigger picture vision is, how does everybody involved in healthcare work together differently than they have in the past?
Yeah, Justin, I really liked at the end when we're talking about the future of all these technologies, you kind of brought up the partnership piece with manufacturers and such, but a little quote that she said, she was talking about machine vision, and she was talking about the complexities it's going to have of learning the instrumentation. And I'm sitting there thinking yeah, I know, because sterile processing technicians all have to learn the instruments in the same way, and they're not computers or machines, but those complexities are real. And it was just so interesting to hear that, from the IT side of things it's going to take a while, but it's going to be real difficult, because this is a complex job. And I think everyone listening is going to be like, yeah, you don't say, it's a pretty complex job. And that's probably one of the reasons that it has taken so long to get some of these IT solutions, to hit, because it's not an easy fix. It's not easy automating the process many times. And that brings us back to the beginning of the interview, that it's just going to be important for users to give feedback, to be open around market research questions and opportunities to help all these innovators out there create solutions that serve us well.
All right, Hank. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. But why don't you tell everybody, we're asking them to make sure that they're engaging and sharing this content. How can they do that?
Yeah, so you can listen to us anywhere podcasts are heard. We're on Google, Spotify, Apple, iTunes, Podcast, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, you name it. We're even on YouTube. But the best way to listen to us is on the Beyond Clean mobile applications through Android and Apple. And now we're even available on the Learjet SID 2.0 app. Check us out and download those applications. And if you love us, give us a 5-star rating and review to tell all the other clean freaks out there why you love fighting dirty. If you've got any ideas for another episode or perhaps an all-star guest, hit us up at info@beyondclean.net. We want to talk to them. We want to talk about the topics that are front and center for you out there in the space. And if you just want to get connected with us in general about other content outside of podcasts, maybe it's our virtual conferences, it's our webinars, maybe it's our live events, you can hit us up at that same email address, info@beyondclean.net. And on behalf of Justin and myself and the whole Beyond Clean team, we want to thank you for listening to this episode and encourage you to keep fighting dirty.